You're listening to the Quint's podcast.
New Delhi rolled out the red carpet on 6 December for Russian President Vladimir Putin. And if you're asking why we are talking about a visit that lasted just a few hours, it's because of the symbolism attached to it. The first is that the Russian president has been very cautious about going abroad during the pandemic, and this is the only second time he has ventured out. The only other time was for a meeting with US President Biden. Preceding the Modi-Putin meeting were also high-level dialogues between the two countries' defense and external affairs ministries. According to a statement by the government, 28 agreements were signed, which include a 10-year cooperation defense agreement, a new consular office in the city of Vladivostok, and the final go-ahead on the much-awaited 7400 missile system. But there is a larger picture behind these meetings, and that's the growing influence of China in the region. Over the past year, we have seen several 2+2 dialogues with the US, Japan, and Australia, all of which are Quad members. However, a dialogue with Russia, a longtime friend and economic partner of China, may cast a worrying shadow over the ties between the two countries. So, in today's episode, we will discuss the relationship between the longtime allies India and Russia and what came out of the recent meeting. For this, we spoke to Quint, Director Studies and Head of Strategic Studies Program at the Observer Research Foundation, Dr. Dara Kharta, a Distinguished Fellow at the Institute of Peace and Conflict Studies, and Aditi Bhaduri, a columnist specializing in Eurasian geopolitics. You're tuned in to The Big Story, the podcast where we dissect the headline-making news for you, and I'm your host, Himmat. In his bilateral meeting with Prime Minister Narendra Modi, President Putin called India a quote-unquote great power and a friendly country. And the India-Russia relation is one of the few bilateral ties in the world which have withstood the test of time. However, the relations have only remained intact due to the strategic legacy that the countries hold. The two leaders were scheduled to meet in 2020, but it was postponed due to the pandemic. But even then, they reportedly have had 6 telephone calls over the past year. For India, Russia has always been its go-to port of call when the question of defense spending arises. An article on the Quint points out that India's trade with Russia accounts for nearly 23% of the latter's exports. However, this figure has reduced by 33% over the past few years due to India's growing ties with the US. You can find a link to that article in our show notes. Now, even though they are long-time allies, the relationship has changed over the past 2 decades, with India moving closer to the United States and Russia to China. And when you look at trade with Russia as well, according to an ORF report, it only hovers around the $10 billion mark, which is way below the potential that exists between the two countries. But if this mutual lack of trust does exist between the two countries, why have the chess pieces moved now? Is it largely to strengthen a historical relationship, or does it point to a growing geopolitical threat east of the border? According to Quint, the head of Strategic Studies Program at ORF, the 2+2 dialogues and framework gives out a strong signal to China to dispel any notion that Russia is not a junior partner at the table. He adds that Russia also sees India as a country that can stand on its own, especially when it comes to fielding of attacks from the west or the east.
Yes, I think to a certain extent, this was a message that both sides, both India and Russia, perhaps wanted to send out to other countries, and China also, that for all the talk of divergences and turbulence in the relationship actually continues to grow, and both countries are willing to invest in the relationship. So I think the 2+2 dialogue, the framework with the Quad countries plus Russia now that India has entered into is a strong indication in that regard, and perhaps it would raise some issues for China. But I think the China-Russia equation is slightly different because there China is in such a dominating position that a lot of the times you see Russia following China. And the reason why you see this investment in India is because I think that Russia also wants to dispel this notion that it is merely a junior partner to China. Therefore, I think the messaging from India and from Russia would have with this platform to China is quite interesting and important. But I don't think China would be rattled as such. But I think certainly there will be questions asked in China about Russia. But frankly, Russia, China knows the long-standing ties that Russia has had with India. And that is independent-minded, that is not going to blindly follow other countries when it comes to strategic decision-making. So I think for Russia it is important. Of course, for Russia it is also important because India is such a big market for its defense requirements to keep India in good humor. But I think largely Russia views India favorably in the global international political matrix because there is a sense of convergence on a lot of issues. And India has been sensitive to Russia's core concerns. India has always been warning the West not to intrude into those spaces which Russia considers its own. And the result has been that a bit of an overreaching on the part of the West has made Russia an adversary which is now tying together with China. So you have potentially two adversaries, formidable adversaries coming together. It's exactly the opposite of the kind of strategic thinking that you saw during the Cold War in America, right? When Henry Kissinger broke the Chinese from the communist camp and brought them into the American camp. So the balance of power changed dramatically in America's favor. But now with the West taking on both China and Russia at the same time, the balance of power is becoming very difficult to sustain because you have two major powers like China and Russia working together, and their relationship is strengthening. And that is something that is a worry to India. India has been constantly pointing that out. But for Russia, of course, India is an independent-minded country. India is a very important defense partner. And India is a country that has often stood up to the West when it comes to questions around, S-400, whether it comes to questions on Ukraine, where India has been supportive of Russian arguments. So on a number of issues, India has been, on I think most issues of sensitivity to Russia, India has been acknowledging those sensitivities. And similarly, Russia has been reciprocating that gesture.
We took this question to Aditi Bhaduri as well, a columnist specializing in Eurasian geopolitics. And she adds that Russia's veto power at the United Nations Security Council is attractive to India, since it has been demanding a permanent seat at the table for years now, but has always been denied by the US's veto. A close relationship with Russia may change that equation.
The second side is that definitely Russia today, like the Soviet Union, its forebearer, has the veto power in the UNSC. So India needs this, and as we have seen earlier in the NSG, in the case of, the nuclear suppliers group, that just having, America on your side did not help. It was not like earlier. So say you would need now who has leverage over China, because it was China who refused that. It is Russia, right? So you do need, because that is again something that India does not have, no matter its growing clout and economic clout and elsewhere in other things. So that is another reason why Russia is very important for India.
Coming to the 2+2 dialogues now, the two sides signed 28 agreements which are largely divided into defense and commercial agreements. A few highlights from the list of agreements is the Rs 5,000 crore contract for manufacturing nearly 600,000 AK-203 or Kalashnikov rifles. Apart from the guns, the two countries also signed an agreement for sharing military technology cooperation for the next decade, that is till 2031. However, Dr. Tara Kharta, a distinguished fellow at the Institute of Peace and Conflict Studies, points out that the bilateral summit did not have the same pomp as these talks usually have. And for Russia, it was mostly to assert its viewpoint on the growing US-India ties.
In Asia as a whole, Russia is still a power to contend with. I mean, it is not someone you can just write off. It is the second largest exporter in arms. It's the largest, one of the oil and gas producer. It's a very good old friend whom we've had very good relations for years. and whom I think in recent years we tend to take a little for granted. But it is a non-threatening power. It is one of the few which does not impinge on our interests. I mean, everybody else does, right? Even the US to an extent has issues. I mean, their presence, for example, in the Indian Ocean is a bit of a challenge to an area which we've traditionally regarded as our own backyard. So I'm just saying it's one of those things. But we've got no problems with Russia. So that's why this particular summit, especially since the last one was cancelled, this summit was important. It is just that it was maybe a little bit disappointing because the President Putin just came and shook hands, had his meeting with the PM, and then flew back again. And it was none of the pomp and show and bonhomie that one normally sees in a summit. So I'm not sure why that was the case. And in the second thing is that there was really not much. I mean, Sergei Lavrov, the 2+2 beginning is important. I mean, that we have the same format as we have with the others. That is important. I'm assuming a lot of things was discussed. This was just the first meeting, so one wouldn't expect a great deal. But if you look at Lavrov's, his interview, he spent more time, grumbling about AUKUS and talking about the US in Indian Ocean. The AUKUS, which he said is against the non-proliferation treaty, so that is their biggest grouse. So if you look at the issues which are dividing us at the moment, it is the India's, involvement in the Quad and the AUKUS, which we've got nothing to do with. But they see it as an extension of Quad, which it is not. I mean, Quad is strictly, as far as we know, is non-military. We have exercises, but we have exercises with them. And what a lot of people don't understand is that we've had exercises with Russia for decades. It's something which we've had for years. The US, all this has nothing, our present exercises with the US has nothing to do with the Quad. So to an extent, Russia is using this platform to make its point about the whole Indian Ocean thing rather than as a bilateral aspect.
The one agreement which stuck out in the crowd was the S-400 Defense Missile System Agreement, which has been on India's wish list for many years now. And you may have heard about this missile system every time you hear or read about US-India or India-Russia relations. So why is this missile system such a big deal? So if you play a lot of Call of Duty like I do, you may be familiar with the bizarre fictional defense systems that are used in the game to combat enemies. The S-400 is basically a closed non-fictional counterpart and cost a whopping $5.5 billion. It is considered one of the most advanced and potent air defense systems in the world, capable of protecting almost against any aerial attacks, whether it be drones, missiles, rockets, or even fighter jets. It also has the added benefit of being a long-range surface-to-air missile, covering an area of as far as 250 kilometers and even scanning targets 600 kilometers away. But the US has been the party pooper in this deal, since it wants India to wean off its long-time defense reliance on Russia. The US Congress has also been very clear that India will face sanctions under CAATSA, or the Countering America's Adversaries Through Sanctions Act. This looming threat of sanctions has remained unresolved since the deal was signed in 2018. However, India has decided to go forward with the agreement despite the threat of sanctions, and the US made no statements regarding the agreement or expressed any displeasure as well. So, what changed? According to Mr. Pant, the pushback against Russia and the US has largely been from the domestic politicians and not so much from the West Wing. He adds that finalizing of the agreement also signals India's ability to convince the US of the need to purchase those missiles.
See, Russia in the US has, unfortunately become a domestic political issue. Mm-hmm. Especially after Mr. Trump, there's this sense in the Democrats of Russia playing a role in Trump's election, though there is hardly any evidence to that effect. But there is a sense that Russia, is seen by certain sections in the American political community as a domestic political problem, which has been clouding a strategic assessment of how Russia should be dealt with. there are some very senior voices, some very sane voices in America who have often said, often underscored the reality that you really cannot take on Russia and China together. Mm-hmm. That this is that you need to break their relationship in some way if you can. I mean, it's not clear that you can do at this juncture, but that's in the past it perhaps was possible. But by constantly targeting both, this alliance between Russia and China has been created, which is actually an artificial alliance because the differences between them are quite significant. Mm-hmm. Now, but because Russia has become this domestic political issue, certain members of the U.S. Congress want to show to Russia how they can make life difficult for Russia. They have targeted Russia. So also this CAATSA sanction, for example, emerged in that context. And I think by not targeting India on CAATSA, although they have targeted other countries, like Turkey has been targeted, right? So, but India has not been targeted. I think it speaks more about India-US relationship than anything else. Okay. India has been able to convince America that, look, it is important for us to have certain kinds of capabilities because India has to defend itself. And S-400 is a good deal for India. It's one of the most cutting-edge technologies available. And India would like it in the context of the border crisis with China. So India's, I think, ability to convince America so far has been interesting, and India has been able to do that with some justification. And if you look at the pushback, it has been, it has largely been at the legislative level, at the congressional level. Mm-hmm. At the executive level, actually, no one has talked about. Even during Trump and then Biden, the executive really never talked about, the U.S. executive never really talked about this issue. It was the congressional mandate. Mm-hmm. So therefore, a lot of the questions were being asked in the U.S. Congress. And at one point, it was really seen as a looming challenge. Now, we still don't know whether, how this would go. But my own sense is, given their own internal challenges that America is facing at the moment, this is not really a top priority. Mm-hmm. However, this certainly speaks volumes about a new understanding that is developing between India and the US. That on some issues, US is now willing to look away and give India that space. This is during Trump also this happened. India was given a waiver on Chabahar. Then India S-400 also India was not really targeted. Even under Biden, where we have seen a lot of comments to the effect that perhaps Biden would be, because he's a Democrat, he would be more anxious to showcase and target India on S-400. We have, from the executive, we have not seen any major declaration. In fact, there has been some senior members of Biden administration have asked the U.S. Congress to give India that space, and in support of India's posture. So I think it speaks about Indo-U.S. relationship more than anything else.
Dr. Karta adds that despite the threat of sanctions, the S-400 missile system is essential for India, given the growing threats at both sides of the border.
We've managed to at least fulfill one of the conditions of the CAATSA, which is that any country which significantly reduces its dependence on Russia in the defense sphere is possibly need not, then there is a waiver clause there. So we can come under that, like I said, because our imports have come down by at least more than 30% actually, from Russia in terms of the defense area. Whether we are off sanctions or not, we as yet don't really know. But then the thing is, I think Indians have also made it very clear that we are not moving away from the S-400s because we have no other choice. We cannot afford, and not just afford, and also in terms of technical specifications, the S-400s are ideal for us. It covers the whole of Pakistan, for instance. Any aircraft which takes off in Pakistan, you'll get to know, of course, depending where it's placed. So that has been made clear, there is a whole lot of congressmen who are asking the president not to sanction India because it is a valuable ally, that there's a larger fight ahead and all that. There are also a few, of course, saying the opposite. And you can expect that a bunch of them will be pushed by our friends across the border to voice their opposition, like Ilhan Omar, all that sort of persons will start saying things. So that you can expect. But I think it would be very foolish on the US's part to sanction us at this point, because that will push us squarely into the arms of Russia and possibly China. I mean, we have no other choice. We are a player in a game which is being played on a stage where you're not the main actor. You are just a subsidiary person, and Russia, China, and the US are the main, sort of say, the hero and heroine of this play. And we have just a supporting role. So your role will be determined by what these people do. So no, I doubt it, but one can never say. With the US, this is the problem with the defense relationship, that at any given time, a US congressman will stand up and say, sanction India, and then there's a great deal of noise, and it completely spoils relations. Second thing is this democracy summit, which has just taken place, which is, going to take place. The emphasis on democracy and human rights, which is what it's all about, and where we have been called a backslider. India, that is not among government circles, of course, that is in the civil society, but it's a very nasty thing to say about India, and nothing about Pakistan, because no one expects anything on Pakistan, right? No one expects them to do anything. But so those kind of troubles lie ahead, where they will be calling out of names and things, which is in tangential to the S-400 issue. But I do know from people I've spoken to that there is very, very strong opposition to this, mainly due to fears that the Russians will spy on US systems. That's not altogether, what shall we say? I'm not a technical person, I don't know, but that is their fear, that they will be, in terms of production, in terms of operation together, in terms of interoperability, that this is a bar to interoperability.
As a close ally of China, President Putin's visit to India does telegraph to the entire world that it has other friends around the region as well. What we are yet to see is, of course, how China may react to this. If you enjoyed listening to this episode, tune in to the Big Story podcast Monday to Friday, where we break down and analyze the biggest headlines of the day. You can find us on Google Podcasts, Spotify, Apple, or anywhere else you can listen to podcasts. If you like listening to this episode, please subscribe to The Big Story for episodic updates. We're available on Apple, Google Podcasts, Spotify, JioSaavn, and most of the other popular podcast streaming platforms. For other podcasts, please log on to the Quint website, and for any feedback, please shoot an email to podcast@thequint.com.
Thanks for listening. Log on to the Quint's website and check out our other podcasts.